As for the hadith, the other criticism about the hadith, Ibn Kathir says that the Ihya is a great book. He was a student of Ibn Taymiyyah. He said it was a great book, one of the most extraordinary books. And he mentions the weakness of the hadith in the book. And he said you'll find in there manakir, gharaib, and he says mawdu'at. But then he says, but it's well known that this is not really a big deal in books of that ilk. In other words, books of tarbiyah that aren't books of the ahkam, so to speak, like books of fiqh, the ulama are much easier. In the same way they're much easier in seerah. Seerah is the weakest form of knowledge in the Islamic tradition. There are many stories in the seerah that some of them don't even have isnad, but they're still told because they engender love in the heart for the Prophet ﷺ, and because they fill in the gaps of the seerah, and they are there, and they were transmitted, and they don't go against anything in the religion. So if a hadith goes against the religion, then clearly it's rejected. But if it's weak, and it's, I've likened it to a D or a C. A D or a C is not thrown out. You don't throw out a D or a C paper. It passes. But it's not an A or a B, so you're not going to use it as your standard or model in a classroom. So Sahih al-Bukhari is A and A+, and Sahih Muslim A and A+, and maybe some A minuses. And then you get into the other hadiths, and you get A's and B's, and then B's and C's. And then you start getting into really weak collections. And a lot of the books of Raghaib or Fada'il, which are the books enticing people to do good deeds and actions, have weak hadiths in them. And that's part of the tradition. So that was not, in the early period, that was not a big deal to a lot of people. And I mentioned also the other day that ulama have said that they were also working with a different set of hadiths. A lot of the hadiths were destroyed. Only recently some completely unknown hadiths that were in the Musnad were discovered in Egypt that aren't even in any of the printed editions of the Musnad of Imam Ahmad. There was some hadiths from the Musannaf Abd al-Razaq that were discovered in Yemen about 10 years ago that weren't in the Musannaf that's printed, or the Musannafat. A lot of hadith work is still there to be done. So this idea somehow that because we don't have any specific source for it, to say that it has no basis is a dangerous thing to do. And that's what Imam al-Ghazali, the people of adab with him, usually say things like lam ajid lahu asla, I didn't find any source for this, or lam aqif alayhi, I couldn't find this. But to say la asla lahu is a very difficult thing to do, because it means you know every single hadith. And there's a famous story of Imam al-Zuhri. It's actually one of my favorite stories of the ulama, because Imam Zuhri was one of the greatest muhaddithin of his time. He's a source for many hadiths in the Sahih collection of Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim. And he was in the masjid in Medina. He was Imam Malik's teacher, but he was in the masjid in Medina, and Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi mentions this in his book Aridat al-Ahwadi, which is a sharh of Imam Tirmidhi, in the hadith from Aisha, which is in At-Tirmidhi, that Aisha said that the Prophet ﷺ, when he used to give the taslim, كَانَ يُسَلِّمُ تَسْلِيمَةً وَاحِدًا, that he would go out of his prayer with only one taslima. He would just say, Assalamu alaikum. And that's the Maliki madhab. And the Malikis don't just take it from that hadith, which is weak. It's a weak hadith from Aisha. But in the sharh, Qadi Abu Bakr wants to prove that it's from the Amal of Ahl al-Madinah, which to Malik is mutawatir. It's the highest form of transmission. It's as good as a hadith or a verse in the Quran to him, if all the ulama in Medina are agreed upon it. And so Zuhri sees a man give two taslimas. And so when he finishes his prayer, he says, Min ayna laka hatan taslimatan. Where did you get these two taslima from? And he says, he said, عن فلان عن فلان عن ابن مسعود أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا خرج من صلاته سلم تسليمتين. So he gives him the hadith with the sanad. And Az-Zuhri looks at him, he says, I've never heard that hadith. And the man says to him, أحط بحديث رسول الله كله. Do you know all the hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ? He said, لا. He said, أحط بثلثي. Do you know 2/3? He said, لا. He said, أحط بنصفة. Do you know half of them? He said, نعم. He said, طيب اجعله في النصف الذي لم تحط به. Okay, put it in the half that you don't know. And the nice thing about that story is it said, ضحك الزهري. That Imam Zuhri laughed. So he himself was acknowledging that is the case. And Imam Malik, when Al-Mahdi wanted to يحمل الناس على الموطأ, he wanted to force the people to follow the Muwatta, and he said to Imam Malik, I want to make everybody, I'm going to write your book, copy it out, send it to all my governors, and force people to follow what's in it. And Imam Malik said, لا تفعل, don't do that, because the Sahaba تفرقوا في البلاد. They split, they went all over. And he said, people are on what they learned from those people. And so he said, أترك الناس على ما هم عليه. Leave people on what they're on. Because if you go trying to force people to do things that they don't know, and leave the things that they know, then you'll cause fitan. And this is one of the great wisdoms of Imam Malik. And this is something a lot of modern Muslims don't seem to understand. That because you don't know something, or that's not the way you do it, doesn't mean that's not the way it can be done. And that's one of the beauties of Islam, and the ways in which Islam preserves hearts and enables people to live together, is that we've always acknowledged ikhtilaf. And Sidi Ahmed Zarruq says that one of the most important things for a Muslim is to know the difference between khilaf and ikhtilaf, to know the difference between opposition and between difference. إذا أخالفك, I oppose you. But إذا اختلف معك, if I differ with you about something, it's a different thing. And the Prophet said, اختلاف أمتي رحمة in Al-Bayhaqi. And its meaning is sound, and many proofs for that. Irrespective of what the sanad of the hadith is, the meaning is sound. Umar ibn Abd al-Aziz said, it's a great mercy that اختلفت الصحابة من رحمة الله على هذه الأمة. اختلاف الصحابة is one of the great mercies for this ummah. So the difference of opinion is very important to allow that. And that there's only one way of doing something is the worst thing that you can do to people. In fact, in the Maliki madhab, if people are following a qawl marjuh, but they've been on it for a long time and it becomes the amal, you don't correct it. You leave them on it. So, in other words, if you have a stronger proof, but they're following something, they've been doing it for a long time, but they have their proof for it, you don't try to force them to do what you think. You just leave them on it. And this is ma jara bihi al-amal, what the amal is. And there are many examples of that where we really have problems that are caused in our community. One of the things, people argue, for instance, about standing, getting up for people. And I don't want people to stand. I don't like it, and that's what I learned from my teachers, and that's the best thing. But in certain cultures, standing is part of their urf. If you go to certain places in Arabia, they get up for the people. If you don't get up, it's an insult. Now, there's these kind of guys that come in that are, mashallah, following the sunnah, exactly as the sunnah is. And they will go into that majlis, and they'll purposely sit down. And then when people come in, they won't stand up. Now, Imam Ibn Abdul Barr was asked about that, and others. And one of the things that he said, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تباغضوا Izz ibn Abdul Salam was asked about that. And he said that the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تباغضوا ولا تقاطعوا ولا تدابروا. Don't hate one another, don't cut off one another, don't turn away from one another. So unity. That is a wajib. And he said the qiyam in some places is the urf now, and even though the salaf don't do it, if you didn't do it, it would create tabaghud. It would create like animosity and enmity in hearts. People would get angry at you. So he said, it's not even far to say that it's wajib in some places to stand. This is fiqh. This is fiqh. It's understanding. one of the great Maliki scholars from Baghdad, one of the Christian ministers of the Abbasids came into the majlis and he stood up and astankarahu. You know, the ulama that were in the gathering, they were upset about it. And when he left, he said, I noticed you all got upset because I stood up for this Christian minister. And they said, you know, the Prophet ﷺ, you know, taught us not to ta'zeem, and especially for Nasrani. And he said, the affairs of the Muslims is in this man's hands. And if I don't show him respect as a scholar, he's going to take that out on Muslims. Fiqh. This is understanding, tawazun. And this is what people have lost. So